Hello there.
It's been a hot minute.
Yeah, a little bit. Like the space behind me is a whole bunch bigger. I have a whole bunch more space.
Live
Uh,
from Studio 2.
yeah, I actually have space that is dedicated for just this now, which is, well, I shouldn't say just this. It's my office and, video game room and place where I do all of my things. But yeah, I moved.
But your wife isn't like, scantily clad immediately off camera like she used to be.
What do you mean? She not? uh, No, she's actually out at a meeting right now, so we'll probably hear her come in at some point. Forget that I was actually doing this tonight. Wander through the door and go, "Hey," and then go, "Oops." Fine. We'll edit and post. It'll be fine.
No, no, we'll leave it in.
I mean, our editors are so highly paid. We should get them to do something.
So how'd the move go?
It's an interesting story. Actually, it's funny because one of the movers actually subscribed to the podcast. That's one of the that was the deal. Um, so it was a little bit of a comedy of errors. The world being what it is. We were moving on a day when it was raining. We have an elevator. We told the sort of manager of the company how much stuff we have. It's like, yeah, it's a two-bedroom apartment, but it's full, right? Like it's not a two-bedroom apartment's worth of stuff. It's a house worth of stuff stuffed into a two-bedroom apartment. Um, we need three guys because there's an elevator and there's only one and it's tiny and we need the long truck, right? Like 30 or 40-foot straight truck. So they sent two guys and a small truck. And the two guys were great. Shout out Cody. Cody and Logan did a great job. But there were only two of them in one tiny little elevator. So when we did actually get some help, sort of halfway through the afternoon. But Cindy and I were up at 5:30 to start organizing stuff and make sure everything was all of our ducks in a row and whatnot. And we had the apartment and the storage locker to move. And we finished up at 10:30 that night without having touched the storage locker. So it was a long day. They came back on Saturday to move the storage locker. So we were a little bit over deadline and a little bit over budget on the move, which is not too much over budget. Like we
Yeah.
budgeted X and we were like, I don't know, like 10% over it or something.
I guess it's fortunate that like you weren't moving far.
Yeah, it literally 5-minute drive.
Yeah.
So yeah, if we were going cross country, there would have been some yelling and screaming. It's actually kind of funny because one of the people who came to help in the afternoon was the warehouse manager of the company,
hmm
and and I overheard her on the phone with the I don't know, like the owner, manager, whatever, basically giving him hell. So yeah, because it was a little bit of a bobble. I mean, it was the weather was terrible. Like it was pouring down rain. A bunch of people called in. They were short people. I get it, right? It happens. And they like we were happy with the service. Just like every move, it didn't go perfectly.
No. Hopefully your last one for a while though.
Hopefully, my last one ever. I've been joking that I carried boxes into this house. I'm getting carried out of this house in a box. So that's my plan.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Hard work and lots of luck to get where I am today.
Couldn't happen to a better guy. What are you
Mm.
drinking?
I have Land Shark, which was a housewarming gift from my real estate agent. Hi, Brad. Thanks for the beer. I don't know if he's subscribed or not. If he does, he's probably not listening.
just bully everybody you run into in person over there. Oh, by the
I
way,
ha-
a
I have,
podcast.
yeah, yeah. Actually, there was a friend of ours who was kind enough to help us clean the house when we first moved in. Shout out Joanne. She was listening to podcasts as she was cleaning the house. I'm like, hey, I have a podcast. She says, cool, I'll subscribe. And then she
Nice.
looked at the subject matter and went, I'm not interested in this.
Yeah, see, I'm the opposite. Like I put zero effort into marketing this thing that I do put a little bit of work into. Like my D&D crew don't even know I do a podcast, and I'd like
Oh, I'm
talk to
totally
them
telling them
once a
now.
week, and some of the guys at work know, but not many of them. Like it's just weird.
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny. Like we're up to what, 11 subscribers now on YouTube. I haven't
Yeah,
even
and I
looked at
think we
any of
get
the rest of it.
we get like 50 listens per episode just through other like audio formats, 25 sort of things a week. Like we're actually, I don't want to say we're doing okay because like nobody's listening to us, but like relative to expectation
Oh, massively
with
huge.
zero effort into trying to
Oh,
push this out, I'm like, wow, we got more than one and
yeah,
they're not
like
related or married to us. So
yeah, like I mean, one person who isn't literally living in the same house as us is listening. Success.
absolutely.
So what do you got on the go tonight?
Well, recording this stuff, drinking some, I got to go shopping. I've
Uh-oh.
basically had this in the fridge. Well, it's not old that it's like bad. It's just it's been in there for like 3 or 4 weeks, and it's the last two cans. So I've got Moosehead Rattler, different Rattler
Mhm.
from last time, and just some leftover Summersby.
Yeah, I got to go shopping too, but I have a feeling, based on conversations with Cindy, that I literally do not have an alcohol budget. So I'm no. People did bring a couple of bottles of wine to the housewarming, and Cindy doesn't drink, so that might be next week or Friday or tomorrow or whenever the regularly scheduled recording is. Uh,
So I had an idea for what I thought would be a fun topic today. And I
cool.
put it in the doc like almost 2 weeks ago. It was like basically after we finished recording the last session. And then I was listening to a podcast that I listened to on the regular over the weekend. RTFM podcast, Jay's Two Cents. And they basically like by accident tangented into exactly this topic that I wanted to talk about. So,
So let's do it better
oh, we won't do it better,
or
but I think
worse.
it's still worth doing it. I originally deleted the topic off our show doc, and I'm like, fuck it, we'll put it back.
I mean, like, what's the likelihood of crossover in listeners besides you? I mean, we have like 25 people who listen. What are the odds
Yeah.
that one of them also listens to the other podcast?
Well,
It,
you never know. I just don't want to, do it and sound like I'm ripping another show off. That's my disclaimer saying I'm aware that this content existed in a recently released episode of a popular podcast and I listened to it. I mean, if you want to yell at me in the comments, that's fine. Go
I,
right ahead. But
wait, do you read the comments? I read one comment. There was a weird thing that happened. You should play the tangent uh, thing here.
I haven't actually queued that up yet.
Oh man, I
I
worked hard on
know.
that.
I
Um,
believe you.
anyway, what was I going to say now? Comments. Yeah.
Tangent. Tangent alert. Tangent alert.
um, there was somebody who commented, I think, on episode 2 on YouTube, and I replied to the comment, and my comment sometimes, like my reply to that comment, sometimes shows up and sometimes doesn't.
Hmm.
Like it's very weird. Anyway,
Did
YouTube
you
has glitches
had
apparently.
had you switched to our YouTube channel account to do it? Because you should have
No,
access to that.
I don't, or if I do, I don't know. No, it showed up under my account.
Yeah. All right.
So, like I
Well,
say,
whatevs.
sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not. It's not like it was like really deep or very astute or anything. No great
Yeah.
loss if nobody ever reads it.
Yeah.
Similar
I'm
to the
sure
rest
that
of
it
our
was one of those
content.
situations where YouTube's like, this account has existed for 9 million years, and this is the first time they've tried to comment on a video. This is obviously spam, and we're going to moderate it into oblivion.
It's entirely possible. I mean, I've had my YouTube account.
Since YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like since YouTube had a 15-minute limit.
Mm-hmm.
Remember those days?
I do. Funny enough, the topic is sort of kind of related to that, but not really.
Cool.
Um, I've been doing a little reminiscing in the past couple weeks.
Well, you
Uh,
are old.
I am old. So, for context, my dad passed like 8 years ago now. And he was a nerd as well, but like his generation's version of a nerd. And I was just thinking about all the silly, dumb shit that I did as a kid with him, like helping out like with work and side gigs and stuff. And because he was an electronics guy, um, technically speaking, a certified electronics engineering technician.
Good Lord.
Uh,
I
but
think
like
I
was a
thought they made those up in the 90s.
well, it was actually a DeVry degree in the late '80s that he got after getting engineered just before DeVry became a complete joke. They were always a little bit of a joke, but it was like a workman's comp thing. He had a safe fall on him and like crushed a
Oh.
whole bunch of vertebrae. And he was like, I need to get into something else. Because at that time he was working like auto industry stuff and he'd been, in a band on the road forever and ever. But he did that. Like he was always a hobbyist electronics guy. Like he was the guy that was just making the weird shit back in the day. And it wasn't so much that kind of stuff that I got into, but it was the kind of stuff where I look back on it now and I'm like, man, if I told my kids about this stuff, they wouldn't believe me. And I'm not talking about technology that like existed back then that just doesn't get used or exist now, right? Like it's not, ooh, hey, you remember the horse and carriage or lawn darts? No, you know, no, I'm talking about the kind of stuff that like we have analogs for today, or the stuff that like we still do today, but it's just so much easier and we take it for granted. And the stories that I'm sort of thinking about that I was reminiscing about are like the times that I used to climb TV towers with my dad. Now, when I say TV towers, I'm talking about towers that were generally attached to the side of your house or somewhere on your property. And you'd have or would install these fairly large, like VHF and then eventually VHF and UHF antennas. Imagine bending a coat hanger into a pretzel and making it, half the size of a building.
Oh man. Oh yeah, I have a thing, and I remember as a kid, you'd go out and there would literally be a pole up through the thing and you'd have to turn it. And
Right.
then when I moved in with my dad, he had the fancy thing where you'd actually turn the dial, but you couldn't turn it all the way around because it would wrap the cables around it and snap them
Yep.
off.
So, yeah. So that's part of what I was doing and what I was thinking about that led to thinking about this episode was A, the antennas, but B, going up and we did a lot of upgrades either to like from static position antennas to antennas with manual or electric rotors.
Oh,
And like we had TV back then. We had color TV, you know,
it
decades and
was
decades and decades
CRTs.
ago. They were CRTs, but like, the basic mechanics of watching TV wasn't significantly different, but there was all of these other subtle inconveniences and part of the
Yes.
process. So to back up and talk about rotor controls, for instance. Now, back in the day, not everybody had cable, or there was a time where there just wasn't cable or satellite or anything like that. TV was being broadcast from local stations, just kind of like local radio, all over the place. But the problem
Thousands of
is
them.
they're not being transmitted with enough gain that you can just stick a wire in the air. I think most young people know that televisions like radios used to have rabbit ear antennas, but they probably know that the same way that like kids these days know what a floppy disk is because the save icon looks like a
Yeah.
floppy disk. They've probably seen television icons or logos with
Well,
rabbit ear antennas.
it happens a lot in like retro movies and stuff too, or you like watch like Back to the Future or the Goonies, for example, and it'll
Yeah.
show up in a lot of media.
Yeah, but the big fancy futuristic upgrade to rabbit ear antennas, these things that were literally connected to the TV in the same room that sometimes you'd have to go over and wiggle them and reposition them to
Oh
get
my
better
god!
signal.
And if you held them, you'd get perfect signal, and as soon as you let go, it's fuzz.
Right. So the solution to that problem was these big outdoor antennas. But the problem is the towers that were broadcasting all these TV signals were all over the place, different cities, north, south, east, west of you, whatever.
The signal is
And
directional.
the signal is it's omnidirectional from a broadcast perspective, but in order to get enough gain to actually watch it, like your antenna had built-in reflectors, so it focused the signal kind of like a satellite dish would. And that part of it was directional. So you would have to point this big antenna on top of a tower outside your house.
And it looked like a conglomeration of rakes.
Right. That's exactly what it looked like. And So something as simple as watching TV was easy, but like if you wanted to change channels, it was a process.
Okay, well, hold on a second there now because changing the channel is also a thing that people don't think about anymore. Like
That that
I mean, I'm old and old-fashioned, but I literally haven't had broadcast TV now for almost 20 years,
mhm.
right? And when we shut off TV, we didn't like switch to streaming or anything immediately. We had DVDs. Blockbuster was still a thing. There's a thing that
Mhm.
goes on the list. So we would go and rent movies, or we would borrow movies, or we would buy DVDs. And if we are going to watch something on TV, it was like you put in a disc or a movie or whatever. But the idea of, and not only that, but you have to get up and go over to the TV and turn a dial, right?
Yeah,
Like
or
that's just
there's
weird
there's a
and
few things
dumb.
related to that I want to talk about too. So yeah, let's go back. Old TVs. First of all, you didn't have to turn a dial. Often you had to turn two physical manual dials. Ka-chunk, ka-chunk. One was
Yeah.
VHF, and it
Yep.
was channels what like 2 to 13. And
Yep.
then UHF, I think that band technically covered like 14 to 87, but I think most UHF tuners in North American TVs probably topped out at about 50,
Yeah.
55 or something like that.
60, I think. Yeah, something
Yeah,
like that.
somewhere in there. So you couldn't even just turn one dial, channel one, channel two, channel three. Like you'd have this top dial, channel one, and you'd turn it like a fair distance and it would just be ka-chunk
Yeah.
channel, 2, 3 to 13. And then you'd have this little UHF dial where the increments between the
Oh,
channels were so small, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. And of course, these are mechanical things. So then there'd be a little fine-tuning knob beside it. So it was this dance, especially when you had these big outdoor antennas with rotors, because it'd be like, oh, I'm
oh.
turning it to channel 13. Then
And the
you go and
weather
turn
had
the
a
rotor.
big effect.
Oh, yeah. Then you go turn the rotor control. Now imagine a box with a big dial on it, and the dial has an arrow, which is great. Now that's a knob. Everybody's seen a knob, but you turn the knob
You might be
to
watching
where
one
you
right
want
now.
it. Yeah. And then inside the knob, there's usually some sort of disc or other indicator which would reflect the position of the actual antenna rotor. So you'd turn it to here, and then you'd see this dial or disc inside go, and it'd take like 20 seconds to move this thing
Oh
around to the
God,
position that
yes.
you'd turn it to. And it'd drift, and you'd have to recalibrate it every, couple of weeks so that it was accurate.
And everybody had little stickers all around the dial for which station you
And
pointed to here to get this one.
and that was I can't remember the name of them, but I guarantee you had these. Do you remember those friggin' cheap label makers that had like the
Yes.
orange or red tape that would
Yes.
just
I
sort of
still
emboss
have
punch
one.
from the bottom? And like
Yes.
every time you set one up or you move to a different house, you'd have to redo this. You peel your labels all off and you turn your TV on, you go by each channel, and you're like, okay, I need to point this thing at Rochester. In Canada, living north of Lake Ontario, we'd often get
Box
a fair
29,
number, yeah, Fox 29,
Box
31.
31.
Yeah. So, we'd be pointing south over the lake and we'd try and find the right angle and then tick, 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 punch. We'd create this little orange label. Okay, there's, 29,
Mine's blue.
31, blah, 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 blah. Stick it on the rotor. And that'd be the rough spot that, you'd have to turn it to. So you'd turn it, then you'd go over to your TV, you'd start tweaking the fine tuning, try and get the clearest thing you can. Once you run out of options there, you'd go back to the rotor and start adjusting it a little bit left, a little bit right, just to get the clearest signal you possibly
Oh.
could. Because,
Ah,
in those days, so we're talking just
these
after the days where you had like two or three radios or television stations, and those were the ones you listened to. By this time, you would probably get where we lived, we probably got 4 or 5 VHF stations and maybe a half dozen UHF stations sort of spread out,
were you
maybe.
in the south end of the county?
I was for a while. Now, when we were living by the Glenora Ferry, uh, obviously we had an escarpment in the way, so we couldn't get much of that stuff. So we were only getting like Kingston, uh, CKWS, and
Yeah,
CJOH
Peterborough.
had a repeater in the county, so we would get some of that.
And if you were very lucky, you got City TV out of Toronto.
Yeah, I never lived anywhere where we had a high enough elevation to get that. And that's the other thing. Like those towers, they were on towers for a reason because like not only did you have to get over things like trees and stuff, but you had to get over the curvature of the earth.
The Earth
So
is flat.
flat earthers, like why do TV towers exist?
Well, they don't anymore because the Earth
Yeah,
flattened.
that's right.
It used
That's
to
what
be
happened.
an oblate spheroid, but now it's flat like a pancake, so we can actually send satellite signals from one side of the whole thing to the other. we
So
don't
so
we don't actually have to launch satellites, we just throw them over the edge.
so we've now spent 10 minutes talking about the process of changing channels. Something that like today, like if you have cable television or satellite television, you just boom,
Push a
it's a new
button.
channel, boom, it's a new channel, boom, it's a new channel. And
Or
that
if you're
entire
streaming,
process like got a little bit better so that rotors started, being automated. There were certain TVs that would communicate with the rotors, sort of like satellite dishes eventually became like C-band satellite dishes that had rams to spin these big dishes around. Similarly, let's go back to getting up and crossing the room to change the channel. So we talked about ka-chunk, ka-chunk, these big sort of tuner dials on these old TVs. Do you remember Sonic remotes?
no.
They didn't last very long, but imagine a mechanical remote control that had chimes in it. And it'd usually only have about four buttons on the remote, like channel up and down, maybe volume up and down. I don't think volume, but think of a tuning fork that has like different
Mhm.
frequencies. This is chimes, kind of like a plate on a xylophone, and you'd push the button, it would just tink. It wouldn't be a long chime; it'd just tink at a certain frequency, and that would tell the TV to do whatever that is instead of
Oh
having
my
infrared
god.
or something like that.
It's like the clapper for your TV.
The clapper was on my list of things to talk about because we have an analog for that, right? Like we've got
Yeah,
Google
smart
Assistants
homes.
and smart home stuff now, and hey,
The remotes that I remember, because my grandparents had one that was super cool. It only changed. No, it did have a volume thing on the end, but it wasn't actually remote. It was like run by cable, but it was like an
like a
extension cord.
30-foot long wire.
Yep, and you had these individual buttons for individual channels, right? And you'd
Oh,
go,
so that wasn't even a
you
remote. That was a cable converter.
ka-dunk. Well, it had like buttons on it, and I'm trying to remember that because there was another thing that had similar buttons. It's like the fan control on the range hood in your kitchen, where
Mhm.
if you push number one and zero was previously pushed, it would extend it, and then you push number two and number one would come up again, and it would
Yeah.
change the channel, and then you had like a volume knob on the side.
Well, they had so here's another thing I want to talk about. Okay, don't let me forget to talk about RF. But
Okay.
when cable TV first became a thing, it didn't work with VHF and UHF the same way that tuning in stuff out of the air did.
Oh, you got to put it on channel three.
Yeah, you put it on channel 2, channel 3, or later channel 4, and you'd have this other device that would handle the tuning of what you had coming in.
Yeah.
But, I think a lot of people remember the old school, like remote control, like big sort of LED numbers on the front of the cable receiver. But
Oh,
before that,
yes, I
there were these
do.
big wooden or faux wooden boxes that would just have like 48 of those buttons that where you push one, another one pops up for
Yep.
each one of those channels. And then it had a little room above it where you could like with a pen or a marker or something write the name of the channels that you were trying to switch to. Boom, boom. So channel 2 was CBC, channel 4 was, it's just
Global. Yeah.
yeah. Again,
Oh.
though, like your television might have had a remote control at this time, even wireless, but to get up and change the channels, you still had to get up, walk across the room, but chunk, go back and sit down.
Oh my god, and commercials. And this thing that gets it, like, I mean, it still exists now. There's still lots of people who have satellite and stuff, even though it's going away. The idea that at 8 o'clock on Monday night, everyone basically in your town was sitting at home watching Dallas. Everyone, right? I mean, it's like if you were a bank robber, it was great because it's 8 o'clock. Everybody's watching whatever the Monday night 8 o'clock thing is. I'm gonna go rob a bank. It's, the cops are all watching TV. And then laser
S-
discs.
Yeah.
So you wanted to talk about RF.
Yeah. So I think almost nobody understood how things worked back then. So a lot
Most
of you
people
are
don't
probably,
understand how things work
no,
now.
true enough. But a lot of people probably remember owning something. Maybe it was an old video game console, like an Atari or a Nintendo or something like that. Or maybe you had something else that connected to your TV, certainly cable converters and stuff like that. Um, Eventually, they had just a little coax cable that you could thread on, but before you'd have these little adapters that just had like two little fork connectors that you would connect onto the back of your TV.
Yes. My
And
Commodore 64 had that.
old computers did. Now,
Yep.
those weren't connectors in the same sense that like AV connectors or composite connectors work, where it's just sending a signal. What they had to do is fake being a television station. Instead of broadcasting a strong TV signal, an RF signal, radio waves in the air, they would broadcast an extremely weak RF radio wave signal over this little wire so that when you're tuning into channel 3 or you're tuning into channel 4, it's not taking audio or video, it's tuning into what the radio frequency of that channel would be. And because you've got these little wires connected to it, it would pick it up as if it was picking it up out of an antenna. And that's why you had the channel selector, because if you happen to have a channel 2 or channel 3 or channel 4 in your local broadcast area, and you wanted to be able to watch it while having this RF connector in place, because usually it'd have some sort of pass through that you would connect your other device to so that your cable could still go through to your antenna, you wanted to be able to find whatever channel it was that didn't have something on it and use that for your Commodore 64 or your Atari or whatever.
For your Super Nintendo Chalmers.
Yeah, because TVs didn't have connectors for analog audio and video. Never mind digital connectors, never mind HDMI. you had to
Or
you had a
display
house
ports.
full of all of these itty bitty tiny uh, or television stations broadcasting with just an itty bitty tiny wire of an antenna. And that's also why, I mean, the United States FTC, CRTC here in Canada are much more sort of stringent about things like RF leakage. So, like, you look in old devices, and most of them that have some sort of RF type functionality are like caged in these metal boxes on the inside
Hmm?
specifically for that. You open up an old Nintendo Entertainment System, and it's over most of the components this big shell of folded steel, specifically to deal with the fact that what you've got there is a miniature television station broadcasting over the air because there was no other way to connect it to your television.
That's just bonkers.
It's pretty crazy.
I didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
I didn't know that. No, to be honest with you, I've never really been much into hardware. Like I was always much more of a software nerd.
Hmm.
Um, and like mechanical things. Like if, like how does a transmission work? I mean, I know how a transmission works. Kind of, sort of.
Hmm. So let's move off of TV and
Oh,
to another thing.
you're very passionate about it, and I appreciate
Oh,
that.
I just like it's hard to explain to people that don't know, kids, youths, not even like kids. Like I'm sure there's a significant portion of the younger millennial population that probably never had to deal with this, especially if they weren't living in rural areas.
Yeah.
Because a lot of this technology held on a lot longer in rural areas
Well,
because you
yeah,
didn't have
it
the
took a long
proliferation
time.
of like cable television or
Cable, yeah, cable. There's still places like where I
yeah,
live right now, for example. I can't get cable.
yeah.
It just doesn't. Just
Satellites were something that rich people had because they didn't
yeah.
have these little Dish Network style little KU band mini satellite dishes that would just
No.
point at a single satellite or have a couple of LNBs on it that would point at two different close satellites. You had these 15-foot and 12-foot big C band
Oh my
wire
gosh.
cages that
You
would
needed
spin
an
around
acre.
on rams. Yeah. And pointed at different satellites in the sky that way, and that's how satellite worked. So it wasn't something that everybody had. And when you were living rurally, um, you didn't have cable, which would have been the first sort of common alternative to pulling shit out of the air. Anyway, let's talk about music.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Well, well, in today, like, you have things like streaming audio, Spotify, playlists, however you happen to listen to music. Well,
Napster bad.
go back a few generations, you got, you're downloading MP3s on Napster, and then
LimeWire.
you're using Nero to burn it to CDs that you can play in your portable CD players. But before that, I want to talk about the late 80s and early 90s, where often the only cassette player or recorder that people had in the house would have been a mono one that didn't have a way of connecting audio to it. It had a microphone. So you would make mixtapes by listening to the radio and holding the microphone up to the speakers. If you
Yes.
wanted to get a collection of your favorite songs so that you could listen to them on demand.
Oh man. Oh, and when
You
the
did that,
DJ
right?
talked, oh, I did. And when the DJ talked over the opening, and you're like, Tarzan Dan, shut the fuck up.
And eventually it got better. Like, it got to the point where if you were fortunate enough to have like a hi-fi stack where you'd have a
Yeah.
radio tuner and it'd be connected directly to an equalizer and tape deck so you could record things direct
Oh my
without the
God. Or if you
microphone
had
to a speaker.
the dual tape deck, so you could actually dub things from tape to tape, and then the anti-piracy measures that they put in place for that, and you had to cover things, do stuff, and get little in-between boxes.
That
Yeah.
wasn't even the most fun part of listening to music back then. I think for me, the most fun part was, unless you were, again, wealthy enough to own, say, one of the early Sony Walkmans. If
Yeah,
you had
which I never did.
a portable cassette player, like the shitty Casio one that you would get at Giant Tiger for like $17.
Which
And
which was like a year's worth of wages at that point.
yeah, batteries were shitty back then too.
Oh
So
my God, yes.
listening to music would be like this. You'd listen to the song that you wanted to listen to once, and it would sound like this. You'd rewind it, you'd listen to the song that you wanted to listen to a second time, and it would sound like this. You rewind
Yep.
it once more to listen to it a third time, and it would sound like this, because you, the batteries didn't last very long. Like alkaline batteries weren't even a common thing back then. So you had these shitty, like, ever ready or store brand batteries that you would buy at Byway or Bargain Harold's.
Oh my God, remember Bargain Harold's? Bargain Harold's had a steakhouse.
Oh, dude. All right,
Does
next
that
episode's got to be the Bargain Harold's episode.
does Bargain Harold still exist as a
I,
steakhouse?
not as a steakhouse, but I do think that there is, near Toronto at least, a couple of like surplus stores that still use the brand. So, so Bargain Harold's, for those of you that aren't in the
Don't
know,
live in Toronto.
don't live in Toronto or the Ontario or Canada, you have your big brands, right? Like Kmart would have been sort of your step below a Zellers back in the day. And then you'd have your
Sears.
sort of like really, really budget kind of like, if you were really poor, this is where you shopped. Like liquidation centers before liquidation centers really existed. And there were brands like Byway, and then like three steps below that was Bargain Harold's.
Bargain
And
Harold's was so awesome though, because they had a bunch of
oh,
stuff that no one else had, and it was all this eclectic weird shit. And Harold was I don't remember, because I mean, I don't remember it very well, but I remember like it just being so much of an adventure to go into a Bargain Harold's.
just Google, like, if you, for a treat, Google the Bargain Harold's logo. Like that alone is worth the experience.
Oh man.
But funny
Yeah.
enough, like half of this old technology that I would got would have come from places like Bargain Harold's. Like when I went,
You know what a
shopping to go
good
to school and I needed new shoes, like they came from Bargain Harold's, and they probably didn't match, right? Like one was one size bigger than the other, and that's why they
I
were
need that.
$4.
I need that. My left foot is actually almost a full half size bigger than my right foot. But Bargain Harold's a good analog today. It's basically an upscale dollar store. right?
Mhm.
Like the dollar store that before, COVID, when a dollar store actually stuff cost a dollar, and there was always the other dollar store where things went up to $3 or $4.
Mhm.
That's
But
what
like,
Bargain
yeah,
Towns was like.
the other dollar store that also had like clothes and stuff like that really
Yeah,
cheap, you know?
yeah.
And like, if you've ever walked, I don't know what the equivalent is down in the States, but here we have a grocery store called No Frills, which is, it's kind of like a Costco, like your sort of low end grocery stores, but the whole shtick is there's no frills, right? So like the floor isn't painted or tiled, it's concrete, and you look up and you're seeing, just shitty rafters and stuff like that. Now, imagine you abandoned a no frills for 30 years during the middle
And,
of an apocalypse
and then filled it with junk.
and then filled it with junk. That's what walking into a Bargain Herald's was like. And
Oh,
I guarantee you, the first like portable cassette player that I got to listen to music on tapes probably came from Bargain Herald's.
yeah. It's pretty. I remember the Walkman that everybody had that was super cool when I was in school was like the bright yellow one with the waterproof flip, the Sport or whatever it
Yeah,
was.
there was the real ones, and then there was all the knockoffs. The
Oh,
Casio one I had was the knockoff version of that you had to pull
yeah,
the big clip off the front. It like went over the buttons, the play, rewind,
yeah,
fast forward buttons. You snapped it open, then it would lift up. You'd snap your, yeah. The
yeah,
batteries in that thing lasted about, you'd get through one and a half sides of a tape.
yeah. And then, if you were very lucky, the tape hadn't stretched.
uh so related to the tape thing, I know you had a different sort of toy situation. It actually might have been slightly after your time, but during the late 80s, especially into the early 90s, there was a lot of toys, kids toys, that were basically just cassette players with fur.
uh,
So Teddy Ruxpin
Teddy
is sort of
Ruxpin,
the prime example, and there was a bunch of knockoff stuff like this.
Furbies.
But going back to like the battery issue, playing music, it would slow down time over time again. You get to a point with
Oh,
a Teddy Ruxpin where, because
I
his
am a
eyes moved,
demon. I am summoning the demon of Ruxpin.
that's exactly what it was like. Because like his eyes would move. Some of them, I think, they even lit up in some spots or something like that. The mouth would try and
Oh
move, and it'd
man.
just become this, and it'd start like
Ah.
popping and snapping because the movements weren't very quickly, all while whatever you were listening to started to sound like this. And I want to consume your soul, little kid.
Oh God,
And
it's
you
funny
wonder
because
why we
it's
all ended up,
true.
the way we
Yeah.
did.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, so many of the toys that we grew up with as kids were, made in a lead factory. It's surprising that there are as many sane people our age as there are. We should have all died very
Yeah.
young.
And this thing with batteries and cassette players goes back even further to like record player toys for kids that were battery powered. The batteries would just be bigger because you'd be chucking like 72 D cells into this thing.
Well, we talked about video games, and I talked about my first Pong console. Didn't
Yeah.
even plug into the wall. I mean, it literally took 12 D-sized batteries. And D-sized batteries were like, I don't know, like an hour of a minimum wage job,
Hmm.
right? So, like, I mean, I got the Pong thing like well after it was not new, and I could never afford to put batteries in it. Like, you'd play 2 or 3 games, the batteries would be dead, and it's like, well, it's gonna cost me $50 to put more batteries in this thing. So, no Pong for me.
So here's another thing. Everybody knows what voicemail is. Do you remember what voicemail was like back in the day?
Oh man, remember having an actual machine that would pick up your phone for you, and
Hmm.
it would actually play the tape? Uh, yeah, I remember they would break. So this is a funny thing because I actually had a doctor call for a follow-up appointment a couple of months ago, and I had forgotten the message. Have you ever left a message on my cell phone?
No, I don't think I've ever
I
called your cell phone.
Oh, you may have not.
Phone
I don't
calls?
know.
Ew.
Yeah, well, anyway, I have a story about that too. But I had forgotten what the message on my cell phone was because I've changed phones. I don't know, like 8 or 9 times since I recorded the message. I'm 49 now, and I recorded the message. I think we were still working at Stream when I recorded my message, right? So it's been damn near 20 years. And it literally says, "I have stepped out of the universe for a moment. Please leave a message, and when I return to the universe, I'll return your call." But I had forgotten that, right? So this doctor calls and leaves a message, and his message is like he's basically laughing his ass off, and he says, "Well, whenever you step back into the universe, this is Doctor So and So, and I'm calling for a follow up appointment. Just give me a call. See you next week." And I'm like, "What the fuck is this guy talking about?" And then I realized, oh, right, that's that message that I recorded 20 years ago, thinking I'm going to be clever, and
Oh,
now it
and
just
it
sounds
was a
ridiculous.
phase where everybody did it too.
Oh yeah,
Everybody tried to come up with these edgy, weird
ding.
messages, you
Yeah,
know?
and
Like,
sound effects and Foley artists and all kinds
yeah.
of stuff.
You
Yeah.
know, we referenced it in another episode, but I even think about like reality bites, right? Like, you've reached the winter of our discontent.
Yeah.
If you'd like to leave
Yeah.
your name, number, and a brief explanation of modern man's existential dilemma, we'll get back to you. Like, what?
Yeah, and it's so
Uh oh,
stupid. Like,
you locked up.
did I? Did you?
Audio Jungle.
So I had two other things on my list that I just wanted to bring up related to this old technology, and then we'll just move on.
Okay.
You know, we're cursing our modern technology by talking about the old stuff. But the
Yeah.
first one is modems. Now, I don't necessarily think anybody's surprised by the fact that in order to connect to the internet back in the day, we had to use dial up modems, which basically made a phone call and then made a bunch of noises. And
Ding.
that's how data was sent. The ones that I want to specifically mention, and this is sort of similar to how you had to fake a radio or a TV station to connect to your television,
Huh?
is the modems where they had a phone cradle in them. And you had to
Yes.
pick the handset up off the phone cradle of your phone and place it into the cradle of the modem.
I
Now, there was a
remember.
reason for it. So, way, way back in the day, um, phone providers, so we're talking Ma Bell, AT&T, stuff like that, primarily in the States, Bell up here, they were a little bit more monopolistic in their practices, and because like they were the only show in town, they would throw their weight around for things like who owns the phone wires in your house and the device itself. And it was technically against their terms of use for you to connect a non Bell or AT&T or whatever device to their phone system. So
Oh,
you couldn't just have a modem that connected by a phone cable back in the day. I think there was some legislation that may have passed. I don't know the specifics of it. It didn't take long for things like my first modem wasn't like that. It was like a 900 baud VIC modem. But I had friends that had one of those old things. He was dialing into like a Commodore BBS. That was pick up the handset, throw it in the cradle, press a button. It would dial its own things, and you would have to, you know, set it either to pulse or tone based on whatever your particular phone system used at the time.
oh my God.
And you could hear it would try to put these rubber cups up against your handset so that like sound didn't bleed in too much because that would
But it
interfere with the
did.
signal, but it did. And if you listen to it, you could hear the modem the entire time going squeal, you know,
It
you
was
could
a
usually hear
fax.
that. Yeah, you could hear that during the initial dial-up process on old computers usually. But once the handshake happened, that sound would stop being broadcast over your speaker or the modem speaker or PC speaker or whatever, the fax machine. But with those old modems, you heard it the entire time.
I remember I had I hesitate to say friend, an acquaintance, somebody who was like the kids of one of my mom's friends, and we went to visit them at some point and stayed with them for a couple of days. And I remember they had one of those, and it was a Commodore 64 that he was dialing into places for. And I thought, like, this is so cool. And it was probably like a 300 baud modem. You know,
Hmm.
downloading a floppy disk, like downloading a megabyte would take overnight. You know, like now we're into like gigabit and like faster. Like you have super fast internet now, right? Like are you on
Gigabit.
fiber?
No,
Yeah.
no, it's cable, but it's gigabit down. I get like 30, 40 megabit up.
My God, that's insane. Your download is almost as fast. Or sorry, your upload is almost as fast as my download. And my download is as evidenced by this episode is not exactly stable. So
Last thing I want to mention, because this technically still exists, and you probably see them and wonder what they're for. I think everybody remembers cameras back in the day that had film, and then like Polaroids before that, because they're coming back now, right? They're
they
what's
are
old is cool again. But
retro.
there was an entire phase, mostly through the 90s, where disposable cameras were popular. Because the process of buying film, loading it into your camera, winding it up and wasting some of the film by exposing it as you're winding it across, and then having to roll it back into the roll, then to take it to get developed was a pain in the ass. And manufacturing and stuff had gotten to the point where making a shitty plastic disposable camera where you opened it, you took your 24 pictures, and then you just sent the whole camera back to often just a drugstore to have the
Or a
film
little hut.
developed, or a little hut or whatever, was a thing.
Here's a twist on that though. Towards the end of that sort of era, all of those disposable cameras were actually digital cameras because it was actually cheaper to make a disposable digital camera than it was to
Hmm.
actually do film. Yeah.
And what an odd thing to get to, honestly. Like that anybody thought, hey, that's a good idea. Like, we have planned obsolescence and almost everything is disposable
Oh,
nowadays.
yeah.
But you don't have single use televisions or single use microwaves. Hey, I want to watch, today's episode of The Last of Us that just came out. Okay, well, I'm going to throw this TV out and go buy a new one now.
That's an odd concept though. Can you imagine? Single use cars where you hop in and you drive to work and then you just throw it in the garbage when you get there.
Right?
And then you buy another one for the trip home.
Like that we didn't land on something like cheap cameras that you just rented instead.
Yeah. Or
Like
because
disposable plastic shit cameras.
I mean, that is kind of where they got to in the end because, like, you'd send in the digital camera and they would just take your pictures off and then sell the camera again. But yeah, just the idea, the fact that, like, because we're definitely in very much a sort of a consumer based, like, or not consumer based, but like consumable type of society where it's intended that we will sell you new and more because they're going to break and we know that. Uh, and that kind of was the beginning of the sort of tipping point of that was the
Mhm.
idea of disposable cameras, disposable things. Yeah.
But, it didn't come from the same place in that, like, I think about how laptops are made today, right? And how so many more components are just soldered onto the main board. So your only option, if you want to upgrade from 256 gigabyte SSD to a 512 or a 1 terabyte, is you gotta, pay the $6 million in upcharge for
Yeah.
the, $35 worth of extra NAND flash that actually gets baked into it to get that. And that's sort of planned obsolescence, in that, like your only choice when that isn't enough is to get a new computer.
Yeah.
And, you see the dollars, the monetization rolling in. These disposable cameras cost about the same amount as the equivalent roll of film.
Yeah. Yeah.
The nice thing about them is eventually they became like waterproof little things, so they kind of had their own use case. Like you could take them camping, take them out in the boat. You're not worried about dropping an expensive 35 mil camera into the lake or something like that. Even if they
Yeah.
weren't waterproof, if you did it well, whatever, I wasted $20 as opposed to $2,000 for an expensive camera. So it came from a different spot, but it still was just a weird spot to get to.
Yeah. It's an odd moment, or an odd pushpin to put in the timeline of human
Yeah,
existence.
like you think about disposable diapers for a baby. Like that makes sense, right? It isn't that, hey, you don't want to reuse the cloth one. It's, hey, I don't want to go through the process of cleaning it.
Yeah.
There's an unpleasant experience there that I'm hoping to avoid. The disposable cameras, the only experience you avoided was
Yeah.
click, and then you had this little roll of film sealed in plastic that you would take
To
with you
be
instead.
to be fair, they took slightly better pictures than Polaroids. Um, but up until that point, there weren't a lot of point and click type cameras, and that actually is something that I think fits neatly into this category. Is the idea that, like, when you go to take a picture with your cell phone, right, at umpty bajillion megapixels or whatever it is now, you don't go, all right, well, what f-stop do I need? You don't worry about exposure, you don't worry about
Hmm.
focus. It's just like, this is what I want to focus on. You have a couple of different options, like, are you going to do macro, are you going to do deep focus, is it a portrait type thing, right? Like, what automatic thing am I focusing on, right? But using a 35 millimeter camera was complicated,
Hmm.
because you had to worry about, like, what is the speed of my film, right? Like, how fast is it going to
Hmm.
expose? What f-stop do I use with that, and what is the interaction between the f-stop and the type of film that I'm using? In addition to that, you also had to manually focus it and then try and capture whatever
Hmm.
it was you were doing, right? Whereas the disposable cameras didn't take as good pictures, but it was literally just click.
No, but there was an entire line of like cameras that worked like disposable cameras that you just took the film in and out of, though, that had all the same feature set, were a little bit, more well made, but like you weren't throwing the lens and everything out every time you wanted to get new film and have it developed.
Oh,
But
I didn't know that. Did you ever see the
yeah,
back end of how they process those cameras?
I did. Hey, if there's anybody young, I don't know if high schools still do it, probably not. But even as recently as 5 or 10 years ago, I know some high schools had like photography art courses where you'd actually have a black room and you'd deal with developing film. If you ever have a chance to do it, even if it's just black and white photography, I do recommend going through that experience. It's not going to, you know, break your brain and all of a sudden turn you into like a camera hipster, but it is just so bloody cool because it is so involved and you have to like that people imagined this in their brains way back when, because this technology goes back, a century, not decades,
Like,
that
more
they
than
were
a
able to.
century.
Oh yeah, but they figure out this process and perfect it, transferring negatives to positives, and your lighting environment and the chemicals involved in developing, and it's just
Here's
very cool.
here's the thing that I never got, because I never got into photography. Like, I barely even take photos on my phone. You start with a negative, which is 35 millimeters by 35 millimeters, and you end up with a poster. How does it get there? How do you take from this to that? Like, what's the mechanism to that? Because I know that there's, like, you float them in chemicals and you do stuff to fix things, and blah blah blah.
Mhm.
But how do you actually transfer from one thing to another?
Imagine a industrial grade Polaroid camera where you
Okay.
have then reactive paper and you're shining a light almost like a overhead projector pointed down, or like a
Mm.
slide projector through the negative
Okay.
onto photographic paper that you're then exposing in the opposite direction.
Okay. No, that makes sense. 'Cause I knew there had to be some kind of a
Yeah.
mechanism, but whenever you see it in movies or TV, or
Hmm.
even Destin from Smarter Every Day went through the process, and he did a really good explanation of it.
Hmm.
If you don't want to get your hands dirty and you want to learn about it, I suggest you go there.
Yeah, that
Um,
series of videos that he has on that is great.
yeah. But like, they always skip that part. It's always like, oh, and here we have this giant piece of paper that we're now going to put in
Yep.
this fixative, and then we're going to put in this thing. I'm like, well, how did you get there?
And
Like, you
it's
started
neat.
with a thing this big,
Yeah.
and now it's this big. How did you get there?
And it's neat because it's not like blowing up a digital photograph where you've got pixels and you're just making pixels bigger, right? Like you've got this, I mean, it has an inherent resolution, but it's not a pixel based resolution. You're film negative
Yeah,
and shooting on, something, it's probably more noticeable in movie film where you've got something like 8 millimeter and whatnot scaling up to sort of bigger film. You get better quality in the negative, which allows you to
yeah.
increase the size, exponentially more and still obtain.
I think we're getting close now with digital cameras, even the ones in phones, that you can almost blow it up to the same size as film.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's not just about the resolution of the optics anymore. It's not even megapixels, like the amount of AI that goes into taking a picture
Oh,
on your phone now to process that picture and interpret it and try and wrangle admittedly shitty pixel data into something that looks in most cases pretty fantastic when you consider like what you got out of digital cameras even in the early 2000s. It's bonkers.
yeah. It's shocking to me how clear and how much I can zoom into photos on my phone. Because I remember the first like camera that would come in your phone, and everybody was like, "Oh, what kind of camera does this phone have? What kind of camera does it have?" I'm like, "I don't care. It makes phone calls." Because you'd take a picture and it's like, "Ooh, this is some interesting 4 or 5 pixel conglomerated heap of colors,"
Yeah,
right?
not
And now it's
megapixels, just pixels.
yeah, and now like you take a picture of a moose across a field and you zoom in to find out like how many eyelashes does it have.
And that's the funny thing about buying cameras now, or phones now, is you're not buying a phone. Most people are buying a camera that also makes phone calls badly.
Yeah. Yeah, because they are really crappy.
Yeah. And most people don't care because again, phone calls, ew.
Ew.
Who wants to do
Oh,
that?
that reminds me of a story. I saw a series of, I think they were tweets, I don't know, or maybe they're X's now with whatever the elongated muskrat is doing. Um, but it was someone made a post and it was basically, what would be really handy is if you could speak into your phone and it would translate, it would do voice recognition to sort of translate your voice into a text. And then the person on the other end could take that text and the phone could read it to them. Right. And then some old person responds to it with what you have just described is called a phone call. And I thought, well, I mean, it's not exactly right, but it is kind of amusing. Because that would be sort of handy. I've actually started using voice recognition for sending texts on my phone because I find that it's more accurate than my typing. Some of that is just
I
because my
can't. Yeah,
no.
I can't do it. I've tried. I find that it's slower, and I see my wife predominantly texts like that, and I see her arguing with her phone so hard over the speech recognition and stuff, where it's just like you're mad at your phone. You're having an argument, like the way you would at running into an incompetent person in a drive-through who can't take your order. You're like, no, no tomatoes, no tomatoes. Back. She gets mad. Pizza. And then she gets to the point where she's, sending me messages where I can tell she just gave up and hit send. And
Oh,
it all looks, and
oh,
hey, you know what? She's not doing it wrong. I love my wife. It just looks so silly when she's doing it that I can't bring myself to do it.
oh. I don't do it in public. Right? I can't stand people who use speakerphone in public. I can't stand people who talk to their devices in public. I hate people who have like Bluetooth in and they're walking down the street having a conversation. You're like, are you a crazy person or are you talking on the phone? I mean, I get people have to do it, but I'm old enough now. I have gray in my beard. I'm allowed to be a little cranky. Um, but this reminds me of a thing. You're talking about being angry at your phone. I had a bad round of golf last week, which happens. Golf is hard. Uh, and I used to get really, really angry about it. And it's a quote from somebody, and I forget where I heard it. I think I heard it on Good or uh, the golf podcasts or YouTube channels or whatever. And the thing was, you're not good enough to be mad, right? And it's so true. Like I'm a reasonably average golfer. Occasionally, I do something brilliant. Like I have all of the shots, they just don't always work. But it's absolutely true that I am not good enough to be mad at the result of any shot that I hit. And that has kind of become a mantra for my life. It's like you're not good enough at this to actually be angry that it didn't work. You are not good enough at life to be angry that life didn't work out.
All right. Let's breeze through the next topic.
Oh,
Um,
do you think we can? Are we capable of that?
we'll see. We talked about the past. I wanted to talk about the future a little bit. We've done some retro video games, and I actually just have a very brief sort of retro talk that I'll get into. But I wanted to talk about the future of video games, um, and where we think it's going. Predictions, personal wishes for the technology. One of the sort of mental exercises I've been having lately is like, for the most part, video games, aside from the ones that take stylistic choices or whatnot, but like a through line has been this chase of
More pixels.
photorealism, more pixels, look more real, technologies that make things look more real.
Yep.
And let me be clear, we're not there yet, but I think we're now sufficiently into that point of diminishing returns where the amount of technological investment isn't going to produce a result that the average person playing the game is going to notice a difference. Like I notice it even with the RTX stuff nowadays. Ray tracing is a really cool technology. And in its early days, I found some of the ray tracing stuff actually looked worse than the kludgy fake ways of doing it that people had come up with because they'd had a chance to refine that technology for years and years and years. And my understanding of how ray tracing works now is like the actual ray tracing portion of it is pretty like low resolution in terms of the number of rays that are being calculated and stuff. So I think there will be an evolution there where like a lot of that stuff happens at a higher resolution or definition, but I'm not sure that like I
Y-
can see
Your
us going.
y- your eyes are going to deteriorate faster than the technology improves.
Well, they already have. Hell, my main computer, I'm still using a 1080p monitor. I've got 4K TVs and people are talking about like 8K stuff. And I'm like, are you just throwing processing power out the window at that point? Like you could have 8K or you could have like 4K with better color processing and better whatever. Like I would choose that option. And when it comes to video games, I guess my question is, if we've hit that sort of tipping point, that critical mass where you're getting diminishing returns out of just trying to chase hyperrealism, what do you think is next?
Well, I'm not sure what's next, but my first thought when you brought this topic up was I want the world to stop chasing pixels and start making games again. Right? One of my I played one of the I want to say latest Call of Duties, but honestly, it's like 7 or 8 or 10 or 12 years since I played one of the I think it was
Yeah.
Call of Duty Modern Warfare, so that tells you how long ago it was. I think that
Not the
was in like
remade Modern Warfare, the
no,
original one.
the
Like
original
Call
one.
of
I
Duty 4,
like
I think.
2015, maybe 2014.
Oh, it's probably
Um,
older than that.
it might even be older than that. I don't know. Like I say, the gray in my beard has leached out my brain cells. Uh, but I was playing the game, and I'm like, this game isn't a game. This game is a movie where I occasionally press F to pay respects. It's and like don't get me wrong, like it wasn't a bad story. It was okay. It's just like I want to play the game, and if the game is me pretending to be an alien with a funny nose jumping on colored cubes, fine. Like it doesn't have to be hyper realistic. It doesn't have to be super
No.
railroady. It could be like, okay, you can't go anywhere else, but no, like it moved on from there, right? Like I played one of the more recent-ish Far Cry games. Like it's old enough that they were giving it away for free, and that's
Hmm.
why I played it. It's Far Cry 4, 5,
Old and
3.
cheap. I think even 5 has been free recently.
Yeah, and it's a you get tattoos on your arm and you go shoot the guy. I don't know, whatever. It's a Far Cry game. I remember the original Far Cry game, and I remember thinking like, this is just another Unreal Tournament. And I was playing this one, and I'm like, oh, this is pretty like realistic, visually speaking.
Hmm.
Um, but it was much more sort of a game. It was like, here are some goals,
Hmm.
accomplish them however you want, which is a lot more gamey, right? Where you have sort of set outcomes and you have a winning condition.
Yeah, and all they're basically all the same now. Like Ubisoft kind of has that formula that applies to
Yeah,
everything they do.
and
Far
and it
Cry, Assassin's Creed.
sure, yeah. I mean, it's all the same game,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But it is a game, right? Whereas for a very very large number of AAA games, it's not actually a game,
Hmm.
right? It's a set of it's a like an amusement park ride where you ride down a set of rails and occasionally shoot targets
Hmm.
or push a button to continue. I watched a thing. Was it? It might have been an H Bomber Guy video. I mean, I'm really working through his back catalog. Talking about the Dragon Slayer game. You remember that? Where it was like it was a cabinet with a laser disc in it, and basically
Yes.
like it's a movie. Don
Hmm.
Bluth did the animation for it, where it's a movie and it's like you hit left or right or arm or leg.
Yeah. Quick time events without the prompt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Um, and like the question in my mind is like, is that a game? It's not really. It's kind of like a choose your own adventure where there's really only one path, and
Hmm.
every place that you come to only has two choices: left or
Yeah.
right, up or down, jump or
Yeah.
don't.
No, it was a mechanism for eating quarters. It was a slot
Yeah.
machine. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's a funny thing is that like I honestly think that a lot of the games that were mechanisms for getting you to feed quarters into a machine were better games than the games that we have now,
Hmm.
because you had like some kind of more of a ticking clock element where it's
Hmm.
like, we're going to find a way to make you lose, right? So you had more of a struggle to overcome, and I'm not necessarily saying that's better, right? I think that the solution that I'm looking for is probably somewhere in between those two things,
Hmm.
where because I don't want to go back to games where it's like you have three lives, and if you run out of lives, you start again at the beginning.
Yeah. But at the same time, like talking about older games, like Super Mario Brothers 3 is still probably one of the top two or three platformers of all time.
Yep.
Not because it looked great,
Nope.
and it looked
Graphics have
pretty
nothing
darn
to
good.
do with making
Yeah,
a
it
good
looked
game.
pretty good, darn good for the time, but because the core gameplay loop
Yep.
was so tight.
Yes.
So, do you think any of the more gimmicky kind of maybe I shouldn't use the word gimmicky, but like the experiments that we've had in recent years with things like VR or motion controls or something, like I don't think any of those have really pushed into the mainstream, and I'm not convinced that they ever will. So do you think that there might be anything that sort of changes the way we play games? And when I say the way we play games, I mean computer or console, input device, so mouse and keyboard or a controller, monitor or TV.
I think so, yeah. I watched, I don't even remember where I saw it, but it was a video of, and I always forget his name, but he was like the champion snooker player for years and years and years and years. Um, oh, what's his name? It's not important. Anyway, so they hooked him up to a VR thing to play snooker, right? And you basically have two gloves, right? And a stick that goes between them so that you feel like you have a pool cue. And they hooked him up to the thing, and he's older now. He's like in his late 60s or early 70s. And they hooked him up to this thing, and he hit a couple of shots, and it's like, okay, yeah, like this responds as I expected to. The feedback's a little bit, not there because you're not actually hitting a ball, right? But he's like, this input should give me that output and I'm getting what I want. And they're talking to him and he falls over, right? And the reason that he fell over was because he tried to lean on the pool table,
Hmm.
right? Like they're having a conversation. So he's like, I'm just going to lean on this table. And he fell over. And that's how immersive that was. So yeah, I think that there's going to become a time probably reasonably soon where we have a different way to interact with things. I think everything has to go through its, like shrink by 90% before it
Hmm.
becomes mainstream because VR goggles right now are ridiculous, right?
Yeah, I just wonder. So I'll give you my story, and I wonder if more people think the way I think, that playing video games isn't about immersive alternate reality. So do you
So
remember when the Wii came out? We had
I do.
a
I
Wii in
still
our
have one.
office, right? So we were playing like Wii tennis and stuff like that. We had Wii tennis tournaments that we were organizing just with our colleagues at work.
I love
And
bowling.
everybody would get mad at me. I don't think I ever lost. And like we had a couple of gamers in the office at the time too. But you get all these people that weren't actually gamers, so they would
And
come
they're
and
jumping around.
they're swinging their arms wide like this. They're playing Wii tennis as if it's tennis. I'm sitting on the couch. Yeah, exactly. My
Yep.
feet up. I'm barely moving. Like I've got my hands resting on my chest and I'm just clicking like this.
Yep.
And I'm just
Because
destroying them.
yep.
Because that is a more efficient way to play the game, a less
Yes.
real way to play the game. And I think
Yes.
with things like VR, and I have problems with VR just because of my eyes, right? Like I'm basically blind. So while some of the newer things have diopter adjustments, like the numbers are not big enough. They they probably never will be. I think they cap out at like maybe geez, I want to say that it's probably only like a +6, I think, on the Sony VR2 or whatever's. And I mean, I
Goodness.
go, -10 in the other direction kind of thing, right? But um even then though, like people play games competitively sometimes. Could you ever see a competitive person or a person that tries to convince themselves they're competitive playing what most people are playing as games today, be it the Call of Duties, the Rocket Leagues, the Dotas and League of Legends, or even MMOs, and intentionally make doing that less efficient for the sake of making it feel more tangibly real. I'm
No,
not sure a large percentage of the population would.
but there is always, I shouldn't say always, there's often a splinter group. And I think that's probably what's going to happen is that you'll see games go in one of two directions. Because there's like right now, like when I was in school anyway, the sort of there was a bifurcation of people and you were either a jock or a nerd,
Hmm.
right? And I kind of fit into both camps badly. um and if you think about now, like people who actually, because there's the community that I live in is crazy, because there's people here who are just like super into sports of all kinds. Like there's guys here in their 70s who can, they still run marathons, right? Like they're biking hundreds of miles a week, right? But I guarantee you that most of them don't play video games, right? And people who play video games typically aren't doing those kinds of activities, just because it's sort of splits. Like, the way that human beings become interested in things kind of
Hmm.
splits into one of those two things. Either I really enjoy pushing myself physically, or I prefer to, push my brain,
Hmm.
or I'm more interested in working the small muscles. Um, so I think probably what you'll find is that you'll find like a bunch of hipster dicks, and that will probably be you and I doing like old school gaming where you're pushing buttons and moving mouses around. And then you'll have the new school of people who are using sort of gaming as a springboard to actual physical activity. The planet's on fire. People are going to have to start doing major sports indoors. You're going to start to see
Yeah.
like actual sports happen in VR instead of under the sun.
Yeah, and I guess you're seeing that a little bit already. I don't know that it'll ever be like, first of all, doing that is expensive, right? Like there's an investment in consuming that, but producing that kind of entertainment is also expensive.
I think you're
And
going to
I
see a shift. That's where AI is going to be the biggest thing, is actually in producing that kind of content. I would
Mhm.
not be surprised to see in our dotage years to see something like the holodeck actually show up and become a possibility.
Yeah. So
And it'll be used for
hypothetically,
porn.
yeah, that's what I'm going to say. Like hypothetically speaking, the holodeck's invented tomorrow, and you get a free one. Are you playing a video game in it
Nope.
day
Nope.
one?
Nope.
And how many years do you own this holodeck before you're playing something that you might qualify as like a video game? It's like of all the episodes of Star Trek TNG that involved the holodeck, the worst ones were always the ones where Worf's in there with his batleth doing, badly killing random pig monsters or something like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's all the crew LARPing in the 1940s
All right.
or earlier.
I had some more thoughts on this topic, but I think we'll skip them and we'll get into some retro stuff.
I used to be an adventurer like you.
Stay a while and listen.
So I know you've played it, and this is why I want to talk about it. I started playing the Mass Effect Legendary Edition. Now, to preface this,
I've only done the first one.
so that's right, it's the only one I got into. I've played all of the Mass Effect games like 6 times at least. I've played actually Mass Effect Andromeda, I think 2.5 times, and not many people like that game. I actually think it's okay. I'm struggling with the Legendary Edition. And it's not that like the rose tinted glasses have convinced me that Mass Effect 1 was a better game than it actually is. I mean, I'm seeing the clunkiness and like, the quests are pretty shallow and like I'm bouncing around the Citadel at this point and, this guy needs, whatever. That's just
Oh,
like go here and you go through a
no.
conversation and then you
Fetch
go here.
quests.
That's fine. I mean, you run into that in new games, but here's where I'm struggling. Whatever they've done, I know that they basically took what would have been the engine, and now it was Unreal 3. I think most of the games were made on engine, but whatever they did for Mass Effect 3, they basically rebuilt a lot of the first game in it. Um, Streamlined some of the combat because, like, Mass Effect, the first game, actually, like, the dice rolls and stuff were happening in the background, more like a Neverwinter Nights or Knights of the Old Republic or something like that. So like it, while it sort of masqueraded as like an action shooter where you're shooting and aiming at things, there was still a lot of random stuff and RPG like mechanics happening determining success. And I think they've found a happy medium with that. But whatever they've done with the visual engine, I'm playing this game and walking around is making me nauseous in a way that like wearing a VR headset can. Like I don't know if it's the bobby. It's not moving around. It's not like a weird bobby camera type thing. I don't know what it is. And the only thing that I can liken it to is you have a 4K TV, yeah?
Yeah.
Do you remember what it was like watching some of the shows that were getting upscaled to 4K? He's watching it in really like crappy HDR, and there was just something about watching old content that made it feel fake, like
Yes.
plasticky and everything just had
The
like
frame rate's
movements.
too high.
Something. Yeah.
Yeah. There's no motion blur.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the vibe that I'm getting with this playing it, where it's just like I'm walking around and I have vertigo issues. Like I don't like heights to the point where playing a lot of my favorite games of all time, like doing platformy traversy stuff where you're looking down and like in the game there's a big pit and you're like, oh, I'm gonna fall, and I do get that little twinge of vertigo playing those games and I kind of like that, but I'm getting it walking in a straight line across solid ground playing Mass Effect 1, the legendary version. I
Uh,
installed the original game and I'm playing it at high resolutions and stuff, and I don't feel that way playing it.
I would almost guess that it's frame rate. But yeah, here's an interesting question, or here's a question I'm interested in. How would you compare Mass Effect with Knights of the Old Republic? Knights of the Old Republic, for context, is the only game. I shouldn't say the only game. It's the first game that I ever actually finished. Like I 100%ed it. And there have been very few since then. Like I finished Cyberpunk 2077 one time now, and I'm struggling to get through it a second time. And some of that is just because, like new house, I don't have a lot of time and I'm
Yeah, yeah.
exhausted.
Um, if you played Knights of the Old Republic because you were a Star Wars fan first, and that's what you're expecting out of Mass Effect, you'll probably like it. If you enjoyed all the ways that Knights of the Old Republic wasn't Star Wars, you know, like because aside from, lightsabers and words like Jedi and Sith and some of the baggage that goes with it, the Knights of the Old Republic storyline was not Star Wars, right?
No,
Like it was a take on Star Wars, and it was fantastic. And if you like those games, especially Sith Lord's, the second KOTOR game,
I didn't finish KOTOR 2.
oh, well, it's worth a revisit, especially with the restored content mods. Um, but if you liked it for the non Star Wars reasons, then you'll
Yeah.
love Mass Effect. Mass Effect 1 mechanically, like I say, it was a little bit clunky because it was still kind of KOTOR.
Oh yeah.
Like it was KOTOR taken to the next level. And by Mass Effect 2, which is probably one of the best 5 games ever made,
Uh-huh.
they figured it out. They're like, you know what? Let's turn this into an action game, but not an action game for people that play Halo or
Right.
whatnot, and still embrace this amazing world that we've created. It is
The world building is quite impressive. I need to take another stab at Mass Effect 2 because I tried to roll right from Mass Effect 1 into Mass Effect 2, and the difference in the UI and the
the
systems behind
controls a
it.
little bit, yeah.
Oh yeah, it was just too much to try and process. I've learned this, and this should be the same game, but it's very different.
hmm
It threw me for a loop.
Yeah, and what I would say about Mass Effect is it's one of those games, and this is going back to, talking about the older games, the coin op stuff that had some challenge. It is one of those games that you can turn the difficulty down to the easiest setting and not really regret it
Yeah.
because there's just so much beyond the core gameplay loop that, like, I mean, I would kill for a show. Like, I've been talking about trying to run like a TTRPG in the Mass Effect universe because it is not just an amazing universe, but it is amazing universe for that type of thing, for an ensemble cast or a group of players. Like you don't need to be the hero. You don't have Jedis and Sith who, like who's playing a well, maybe you'd play a bounty hunter, but like who's playing a, random schmuck with a blaster in a world with Jedis,
Yeah.
you know? Mass Effect, I mean, you have cool shit that's all like a threat that's plausible that you can deal with. And then the overarching, especially in 2 and 3, as you explore the Reapers, the overarching threat, which is so unimaginably over the top that it's fantastic.
Right.
And it just explores some neat concepts too, things about artificial intelligence and things about creating AI, robots or whatever, and the concept of artificial slaves with the stuff going on with the Geth, for instance, and
Right.
you have these things where the Geth are kind of your enemies in the first game and become a core part of the storyline, and in fact, one of your allies in the next 2 games. And
Oh.
of course, all the actions, like all the choices that you make, have mostly a superficial but a tangible impact on the direction the story goes, what allies are going to be there for you at the end of the game. And your decisions in like the first 45 minutes of Mass Effect 1 can shape the narrative in the last hour of Mass Effect 3. I do
Uh,
recommend you give it a shot.
yeah. I'll have to revisit that.
All right. You wrote, oh, look, it's the consequences of my actions in the show notes. What do you
Yeah.
mean?
Okay, so I think the retro gaming thing was originally my idea. May not have been, but I remember being very excited about it at least. And now I'm looking at, like, you've made notes about Mass Effect and all of these things, and I was going to play some games, and I literally haven't. I'm like, I have nothing to say during this segment, but like, it was the kind of thing where I'm like, we should do this, and now I didn't do it. I didn't do my homework. I'm sorry.
I was rewatching parts of John Wick 4 the other night now that it's out digitally.
I haven't seen it.
And it's funny because we tried to get into Hotline Miami, but there is an entire scene in that game, which I want to say that they're probably trying to reference a different game, but like recreates that over the top, crazy Hotline Miami ish kind of action shit that is worth watching the movie alone for just that ongoing scene. I mean,
The
John Wick
whole
is 4 is just basically like set piece to set piece to set piece to set piece. They know the
That's what the
story's
movies are
ridiculous at this point.
for.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And they leaned into it. Like they're like, hey, you know what?
Good.
We know this world we've created is a little bit silly. We know we've basically made John Wick Superman at this point because like he should be dead a million times.
Oh, at least.
So let's watch, almost 3 hours of nonstop action where we're torturing this poor character physically beyond points where any human being could possibly survive because it's fun.
Yeah, that's the whole point. I love there was an interview that Keanu Reeves did where it was like, how many John Wick movies are you going to make? And his answer was, I'll keep making them as long as people want to watch them. And I'll tell
Yeah.
you what, if that's the case, he will never stop making them because I will watch them as long as he keeps making them.
Yeah. I'm not sure if this is going to be the last Keanu movie or not.
He's getting older.
I mean, he was slow in the first John Wick movie. Like, no, I don't know how many people know that he had like a really, really bad spinal injury while doing The Matrix.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, like I'm not sure that it was life threatening, but it was like you'll be lucky to walk kind of threatening. Like this could
Oh,
go, one of two ways, and he got really, really lucky. And the fact that he's still doing movies like this, where he's doing a lot of his own stunts and the way they choreograph and the action of John Wick is clearly designed to still feel like he can do it.
you know what though? Like, one of the things about John Wick that I really and the John Wick sort of style of combat that I really enjoy is, rather than, hey, I'm super fast and super strong, it's more about, I'm in the right place at the right time, right? Like, I'm anticipating my opponent more so than I'm just faster and stronger. So I mean, as much as John Wick is an ultra violent, just punch him up, it's also a, I'm smarter than you rather than I'm stronger than you. I don't know. I appreciate that style of choreography more than, because Jackie Chan was very good at that too. It's like, yeah, all of this stuff is happening, but I'm just a step ahead of you all
Hmm.
the time. It's like, I'm not necessarily faster, not necessarily stronger. I'm just always a little bit ahead of you, and I think that's cool. Yeah, I couldn't get into Hotline Miami because I like it. The opening music gave me hellish anxiety, which is the point. So they succeeded. I couldn't do it.
Yeah, haven't I assume you haven't managed to fit any gaming in the last couple of weeks with the move.
I've played some solitaire. Um, that's pretty much it. I
That's
loaded
retro.
up. I loaded up Cyberpunk like one time, and I literally, since we last, like, the last two episodes, I've been trying to play Cyberpunk, and I literally haven't done the first mission yet.
Yeah,
I'm not
I
even to
would.
the point where I'm at the interview room with Dex, and you actually get to meet, oh, what's her name, the hacker lady.
Yeah, yeah.
In
I would wait until the DLC drops because there's a patch that's dropping with it that changes a bunch of the mechanical stuff for even the base game, like gear and stats and all of that's changing. Like there's a fully fleshed out cyberware system that's coming, and a lot of the environmental stuff, like police actually, like establishing a reputation for yourself and escalating kind of Oh, the
Oh,
cops are upset with you. Oh, now, you're at the point where Militech's coming after you. Like, I'm interested in seeing how that plays out because it won't just affect the new material. Like, it's going to affect the experience of the original game. So it's probably worth just waiting. Like, if you're not like, oh, I got to get through that expansion material in the first couple of days, if you're willing to take your time with it.
oh, lordy! Listen, when the DLC comes out, I'm going to be waiting for it to go on sale. I'd love to
It's
get it day
actually,
one.
I think it's only 30 some odd bucks that they're selling the DLC for.
Oh, currently my budget is
All
$0 for video
right.
games.
Well, we'll have to start a Patreon so that our 2.5 followers can chip in and help you play the Cyberpunk
Oh my God,
expansion.
I have to twist the arm of some millionaires to follow our Patreon. Start a GoFundMe for my video game addiction.
Yeah. You were talking to elongated muskrat. Is that what you called him earlier?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe he can kick some of that sweet X dollars over to us.
I don't think he has any anymore. I think he's losing money hand over fist.
Oh, it's so silly. Do you want to talk about any tabletop stuff today, or?
We should actually talk about the one shot that you ran on the weekend.
All right. Hey, it's part of the show where we talk about all things table talk.
Yeah.
Mostly D&D, because like
Yeah.
that's all we're kind of playing right now.
That's what we're into.
So just a quick update. My Tuesday night group has been back at it for a couple of weeks. We had a couple of weeks off, and it's been nice getting back into the swing of things. They've between 2 sessions ago and our last session, we have kind of a campfire chat similar to what you were running for your games, and they went off for an entire week. I counted it. I threw it into my text editor to count words. I had over 13,000 words of just RP between characters
Between
to
sessions.
catch up on between sessions. It was like that qualifies, I think, as a novella
It's
at that
close,
point.
yeah.
Like that's beyond short story and into novella territory. And it was great. But we're not going to get into detail on that. We actually ran a one shot Sunday. Eh,
It was fun. I enjoyed myself. Going up some kind of super extra elder dragon breeding mother's ass / cloaca in order to win was an interesting idea. I'm not sure it came off as
no. Well, I mean, it was okay. I expected it to turn into more. So let me back up and high level it. The basic mission, and one shots tend to be a little bit more linear because you don't have time to just kind of invent a lot of
explore.
shit. So it's a little bit
Yeah.
more on rails. And the way I go about planning the one shots when I'm running them, now this particular series of one shots, it's basically the Expendables, but D&D. You're part of a team that does crazy shit. I do this little mission brief at the beginning that just kind of kicks off the thing. You get that like before a session starts. And the mission brief was, hey, there's a sinkhole has opened up in such and such a place, and a bunch of creatures are coming out and taken to the skies. And we've been hired to go in and deal with it, get into the sinkhole and deal with it. But we can't land, you can't get in there, so we're going to fly into this thunderstorm. You're going to skydive through this cloud filled with dragons until you get to the sinkhole and then go in and deal with it. And what happened is they skydive through, fight some dragons, land in the sinkhole, which turns out to be the asshole of a giant underground beast that's brooding these things. You worked your way in, found the heart, blew it up. I mean, that was the one shot.
Yeah. There were a few jokes along the way. I was playing Dolph Lundgren, except I was actually playing Rutger Hauer from Blade Runner, who was channeling, is it HK-88 from Knights of the Old Republic?
HK 47, I think.
Yeah, HK-47. Yeah.
But without the
Postulation.
angers, yeah.
Yeah,
None of the
exactly.
you didn't say meatbag once, I don't think.
No, I didn't, but it crossed my mind several times.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things where like they either you find the right mix of characters and it's fun, or
or it's
you
a
just
mixed
the
bag of
magic
nuts.
doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
And like the characters there were individually kind of fun, and for one shots I'm not forcing a particular theme on people. Just play the character you
Yeah.
want to play, have fun with it as an individual, like as an individual player, and if it meshes well, then we'll all, it'll be greater than the sum of its parts.
Yep.
And I think the mix just fell a little bit flat, and that was fine. I still had fun. I tried something combat wise with the aerial thing, where I wanted to try and create this sort of dynamic moving map thing where you're having to position yourselves reacting to something that hadn't happened yet. And I don't think that came together in a way that really felt gamey or engaging to me.
No, not
And
really. It was
no.
clever. Like, it was a neat idea, but it was a little bit clunky.
Yeah, and some of it was just down to bad rolls, right? Like a couple players tried things like I'm going to lasso this dragon's neck and try and ride it down. And oh, you rolled a 2, and as much as I want to give you the opportunity to do that, you rolled a 2.
It doesn't quite work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a little tough. I really think too that, like, the sort of the brief was avoid all of the dragons on the way down.
Yeah, and like
Um,
the
eh,
first thing was I'm going to attack a
I,
dragon,
yeah,
which of
exactly.
course is going to happen, right? Like
I
it's,
mean,
it's a one
yes.
shot.
I mean, it's D&D. That's what we do. We see a thing, we kill it.
Yep.
I did find, like, the group worked really well together. It was the group, because they're mostly your Tuesday folks, right?
Yeah.
And they obviously had good chemistry together, and I was kind of the fifth wheel. Uh, and I think that it worked out okay, but it was like, some technical difficulties made it a little
They
bit
did.
wonky.
We had a player that their computer basically blew up in the last little bit, so they were playing on their phone and using a manual character sheet, or I think they were on D&D Beyond on their phone too, and the audio quality made it a little bit tough there. And then one of the other players has spotty internet, so kind of like what we were running into recording, they turned into the robot for part of the session too.
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah, and the whole thing there is that I was basically playing as a warforged barbarian, and being a robot. Uh, and I thought I thought I did okay, but it wasn't as robot-y as I was hoping for. Um, and
yeah,
that
I
was just
think I think that what got me, honestly, I know a lot of people run D&D groups of like 5 or 6 players. I don't like 5. I like 4.
yeah.
And having even just the fifth person at the table and trying to, and it's probably my fault, and it comes down to style. Like I try to avoid the situations where it's like, okay, it's your turn. All right, well, I roll 20. Does that hit? Yes, that hits. How much damage is it? Okay, it's the next turn. So I try and talk through turns a little bit, and like, okay, you do this and this happens and this is how the creature reacts. And sometimes I'll throw
Mhm.
some silly shit in there, but that just really drags the pacing down with the fifth. And I play 4 regularly, like with your group normally, and with my Tuesday group, like it's just always been 4, and that's what I'm used to. And I realized as I was in that game this weekend that 5 is just too much for the way I'm doing this, and either I need to adjust or I just need to run with 4.
Yeah, or I mean, like, you have to get characters. Like, I try really hard to do, like, here's all my stuff, right? Here's a little bit of flavor, and that's my turn,
Yeah.
right? Because if you try and add too much flavor, because there's 4 other people who are trying to also play here,
Yep.
and if you're not doing something super extra holy shit cool, it's boring for everybody else, right? So it's, like, yeah, I make my rolls. Okay, that's out of the way, because that's just accounting. Like, we
Mhm.
do the accounting, and then, like, I drop my funny one liner, whatever it is, and move on. Um, Most people don't like to do that. Like, I find a lot of the people that I play with, like, when you're rolling actual dice, they will roll to hit, ask if it hits, roll damage, add it up, ask if they have advantage, ask if they have bonuses, ask if this works, ask. I'm like, roll all of your dice. If you miss, the other
Ignore
dice just
most of
don't
the
count.
dice. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one of the nice things about like playing in the VTT space is it really does automate a lot of those mechanics if you've got it set up right to speed that part of it up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was just struggling with the pacing of the other stuff where I mean, it's a one shot, and the setup for it is I want you guys to just be silly and have fun.
Yeah.
And everybody has their own definition of what silly and fun is. There's no right or wrong, but some of those definitions require a little bit more breathing room. And the way I was running a game of 5, that just
I did find and I don't remember any of their names. And oh my God, if any of you listen to this, I'm so sorry because you were all awesome. Um, but there were 3 ladies and a dude, I think.
Mhm.
And the uh, um, I wrote them down. Hang on, I wrote down names. I did.
so
I'm not. I'm gonna
Chris,
get them
Lisa,
wrong.
Kirby, Vicky.
Yes. Lisa is Moon, right?
Nope,
No.
that's Vicky.
Okay, so that's Vicky. So Vicky
So
was
Vicky was
was
playing Bianca, the
Bianca, the little kitty tabaxi chef person.
yeah,
No idea what her actual class was. She was a barbarian too,
she
right?
was a barbarian. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean it was more important that she was a chef.
Hmm.
But the voice that she did when she was being uh
Raging.
no, the other one was
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
great.
yeah, yeah.
Was great. Chris, the gnome necro Fillmore, he played his character really really well. Like it was whenever he was talking, I'm like I get the sense without it being over the top that this is someone who is a little bit inexperienced and has bitten off more than they can chew and really doesn't know what they're doing. Perfect. Um, uh, Brain something. I can't remember what her screen name was.
Yeah, that
Uh,
is Lisa. So she was playing the
Mal.
cleric fighter. Yeah.
Yeah, the half orc. Um, was like I just remember thinking like, are you really a cleric though? Which I think is like the sort of thrust of her character. So that was
Mhm.
on point. And Kirby, who was playing Lil, who was a bard, she was the one who had the spotty internet. Also, these people are
She was
like
the one
from
without a computer. Yeah, she
yeah,
was. Yeah, so she's from Great Britain. Then I
yeah.
got a player from Michigan, a player from Vicky. Where's she from? I think Pennsylvania area
I was gonna say
ish.
they're from all over the place. Like, how did you
Yeah.
bring these people together?
Well, funny enough, I wanted to run a game of my own because I'd had this sort of campaign setting bottled up, and you were running a game at the time, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to take over because your shit's really good and I want to play it. But I wanted to start running my own game, and I'd lined up some locals, and they all basically bowed out in the last week, save for one. And then I'm like, okay, I'll reach out on some Facebook boards. I'm going to specifically go after people that have limited experience. Start as sort of a noob friendly thing because it was going to vibe with how I was starting to run the games anyway. And then some of them backed out, and it turned out that I had Kirby signed up, who had tons of experience. I had another player that survived maybe 4 or 5 sessions. Spotty attendance, I think, had some personal stuff going on, so they decided, you know what, I'm going to step away from this. And I was like, okay, fine, whatever. And I basically Kirby knew Vicky through another game, and her game had ended like the previous week, just like spontaneously. Their DM was a dick and just said, "I'm not doing this anymore. Fuck it." Like, well, we're gonna have an opening at the table if you want to join us. So I think 5 or 6 sessions in, she joined, and that's our group.
And there you are.
Chris is Niagara Falls. He had dabbled with a game that I don't think was going all that well. And Lisa was a similar situation. I think she'd played a little bit more with another group that was semi-regular, but was looking for a different vibe. And they're all very different players in their own ways. And it, as a regular campaign group, has been like the best thing I could ask for, honestly, for players. Like,
They seem like, I mean, experience aside, they seem like very good players. Like they're into it. They're respectful of each other. Like they were very very casually welcoming to an outside person joining the game, which I
mhm.
appreciated a whole bunch. Like it wasn't like, oh hey, we're gonna do a whole bunch of stuff to make you feel welcome. It was just like You're part of the group
Yeah,
now.
and they've been bugging me to try and get Tanya to join in on occasional Tuesday games and stuff with us. And I mean, I'm not open to it if I can, make 5 people kind of feel appropriate. But no, they've been fantastic, and they are into it. Like I say, I mean, 13K word novella of role playing between sessions, and you saw Vicky posting pictures of her satyr hoof high heels without the heel boots that she's wearing at a convention.
I
Like,
I literally I just to give people who are listening a first of all,
yeah,
they look fantastic. Like they
yeah.
look like actual hooves. It's amazing. It's
But
like
your
super
comment was appropriate. Like, I
like
literally fell on my ass just looking at the picture of them.
oh, I sprained my ankle when she posted the picture. Like I'm
Yeah,
literally sitting in a chair and I've sprained my ankle. Like there's no
yeah.
way I could yeah. I want to wear
Imagine,
them. They're that
imagine
cool.
like elevator platformy boots that should have a spike like that long at the back, and
Yep.
then cut the spike off so it looks like just a hoof.
Yeah.
It's insane. There's
Yeah.
no way this person's walking around in those, but hey, they're passionate about it. She's willing to break a leg, I guess.
I mean, you gotta suffer for your art, I suppose. But yeah, they were incredibly impressive.
All right. I'm going to do a pod bag that is related to Table Talk, and then we'll close out the show. I don't think we're going to go too much longer here. But we did have a pod bag question. Hey, Dungeon Masters, what's the most elaborate or surprising puzzle you've designed for your players, and how did they solve it? This is an
Um,
interesting question because I know my answer isn't going to be an expected answer for this.
you know what? I'm actually going to answer this question with a puzzle that my wife came up with. Because Cindy has run 2 or 3 sessions of various things. I strong armed her into running a session of Call of Cthulhu. I think it was. You were there for
Yeah,
that.
we ran Call of Cthulhu with her. Yeah.
Yeah, and she struggled with it a little bit because she ran the beginner thing, but wanted to stretch it out to like more extra time. So it
Hmm.
felt a little bit stretched. But she's done D&D twice, both times with like concepts and everything that she's like just created out of nothing. And the one I don't know if you were in on that game, was we it's hard to wrap your mind around, and we didn't actually solve it. She had to explain it to me when the game was over. Like we finished things without actually figuring out what was going on. But it was basically we were inside a pyramid that was inside out, right? Which I don't even know how to explain. It's
Hmm.
like you're walking along things and she's describing things and this is what it looks like, and then you go through a door and you see this. Um, and it's a little bit like bending your mind around the idea that a Moebius strip has like one side and one edge, right? It's a pyramid, and we know it's a pyramid, but we're inside of a pyramid, but we're actually on the outside of the pyramid. And after she explained to me what was going on, I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. But like we were trying to solve like how to get out of this thing, and the
Hmm.
answer was we were already out of it. We had to like go inside of it, and eventually we just figured out like we go through wherever and break a thing or whatever. But we solved it by accident is how we solved it. But the puzzle was literally impossible. You needed a fifth dimension.
Hmm. So I don't run a lot of puzzles. And when I do run like actual puzzles, what you would think of as puzzles, I typically take the approach that you do, which is I don't have a solution to this puzzle in mind. I'm just going to let you guys try enough cool shit until I'm like, that's awesome. You've solved the puzzle.
Yep.
But I think the favorite thing that I've done, and it's not an entirely original idea, for probably a better example of this, check out Z Bashu's video on Countdown Puzzle. But the basic setup of how the puzzle works is that like you do something that triggers a countdown, and everything seems like it's really dangerous. But the solution to the puzzle is to let the countdown get to 0.
Right. And everybody stops it before it gets there.
Yeah.
Yep.
So with my Tuesday group, this is going back to like maybe our third or fourth session. Uh, Part of what they had to do in our campaign world, instead of getting the tavern, the inn that you guys got, the Dryad, they got a house in Cliffside, which was just sort of the opposite side of town that was haunted. And by
Ah,
haunted, there was a temple underground and yada yada yada. Not entirely different than that initial setup that you guys kind of had, but there was actually a sort of a manifestation in this house that was haunting it. And the house was a weird house where it had like a weird secure room upstairs. So there was a big, almost like a bedroom office type thing. On one side, there was a magic mirror that they could tell was magical because when they looked in it, it was like true sight. So it was seeing things that, like, through illusions and stuff like that. And when they looked at it, they saw that there was a door on the opposite wall that they couldn't see physically looking at it and examining it. And after doing some examination of the room through this mirror, they realized that the desk on the wall, just sort of adjacent to the door, had a button on it. And when they pushed the button, the like shutters came down on the windows and the door closed shut firmly. So it was dark in the room, and there was this little stone golem thing on the shelf next to where the door was that just started counting down and taunting them. You're in shit now. 9, 8. You better get out. Now you're fucked. 6, 5. And they didn't go through the process too many times of push the button to stop the countdown, but the shenanigans they got into like, okay, well, I have a familiar that I can do some stuff, so I'll summon them, we'll lock them in the room, we'll go out here. And it's like one of them's a soul knife rogue. She's like, okay, well, I've got some telepathic stuff, so I can kind of watch what you're seeing. And it just turned into this anticlimactic but fun situation where they're all panicking outside the room waiting for the house to explode, watching through the eyes of a familiar eagle that's inside the room ready to explode. And this golem counts down, its eyes are glowing red in the dark, counts down 0, its eyes stop glowing, doors
and
come
the
up,
door
and the
opened.
door opens. Now
That is a
there's
that's a great
better ways
puzzle.
to do that, and this is why I say do the Z Bashu video, because the variation that he does is when you push the button, it doesn't stop the countdown, it just starts it at the highest number again. So
You
10,
have to
9,
just
8,
keep
7. You
pushing it.
hit it at 1. So it becomes like the Lost thing for anybody that's watched Lost, the station where you had to keep pushing the number at a certain time, or you're worried that everything's going to blow up or the world's going to end or whatever. It's kind of like that, where you just kind of got to keep pushing it or let it count down to 0. The way I set mine up, they pushed the button and it just stopped the countdown.
So they got time to talk now.
Yeah, they were, like I say, it was 3 or 4 sessions in. I didn't want them worrying about TPK and shit. And those kinds of things. We had some newer players at the time, and I sort of reduced the anxiety a little bit, give them the opportunity to be a little creative with it. It was still fun.
Yeah, I really enjoy the idea that you don't need to have a solution in mind because you can make some really interesting puzzles if you don't worry about how to solve them, right? Like if you have to have a solution to the puzzle, then the puzzles, because
Yeah,
if you
and
do that, the puzzle has to be really simple.
I kind of figured that out trying to run like canned material, like existing module stuff where it's like, here's a puzzle and this is the solution and there's 3 steps and they got to go there and get this and put it there. And it's just like, well, if you
How do you
don't
lead
get
them to
step
that?
1 and it takes 45 minutes to get to that, like, the fun stopped 42 minutes ago.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, it's fine to make things like challenging as in like it's going to take a whole bunch of time to do this, right? Like you have to assemble the 7 parts of the staff. That's fine, right? You don't have to hand people the parts of the staff, but you do have to give them a you have to go to the mountains of such and such, and then you have to fight the dragon of the thing, and you have to fight the troll under the bridge, and you have to do all these things,
yeah, and I would almost
but you're
call that
having
not
fun.
puzzles, right? Like that's
No,
that's that's more like a quest list at that point.
sure,
You know, I think when
sure.
most people think puzzles, they're like, ooh, you were standing in a room and there's pillars with symbols on it that seem to think we got to do something because we're trapped in here. And now what do we do? And Oh,
Yes.
we got to decode that this is some strange alien language, and if we twist the pillars at certain angles and
They're
stand on
not
our heads, and
they're not aliens, they're interdimensional beings.
mm, from the space between spaces.
Sure. Same thing we do every weekend, Pinky.
Well, I was just finishing the rest of the line. You were quoting the fourth Indiana Jones movie, were you not?
I mean, yeah, kinda.
Yeah, I hate you. You know what? Let's wrap it up
Yeah, let's
with
do
some
that.
parting gifts.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Anybody want a peanut?
Telson,
Shane.
what gifts do you have for our loyal viewer?
Well,
Singular.
I have a request for a gift for myself because I'm old and my memory is bad and I don't know what I've actually recommended in this segment previously.
We've done it, what, twice?
Yeah.
It's probably been
Yeah.
Red Letter Media both times.
Well, yeah, it was definitely Red Letter Media once. I can't remember what the other one was. Anyway, but there is a podcast that I listen to that is really humorous called Chasing Scratch, which is two guys who are, I think, now in their 40s, but they start out in their late 30s, trying to become scratch golfers. And I think I may have recommended it before, but they are just two entertaining fellas. They are going about becoming better golfers in the least efficient way possible, and it's entertaining the whole way. The other thing that I wanted to bring up, because I think that you are recommending a music thing, if I'm
I
reading
am.
that right, is Moxie Fruvis Bargainville, which is one of two albums that Moxie Fruvis came out with. Ignore all of the politics and horrible things that are happened to and around any and or all of the band members. The music is fantastic.
I am recommending music as well. I'm recommending a specific album by a specific Canadian band that, unless you are a fan of this kind of music, or uh, Canadian, or funny enough, Australian, they were bigger in Australia than they were here, and they made a little splash in the US. The band is called The Tea Party, and the album you want to check out is The Edges of Twilight from 1995. Now, what makes the Tea Party so interesting is that they're hard to define as a band, and certainly every one of their albums is an evolution of something or other. But this particular album is a blend of like progressive rock with a lot of, um, I will say, Middle East and Indian influences and some Asian influences. It's the kind of thing where you have to be receptive to it, or you might think these guys are a bit up their own ass. But don't don't listen to it in the background. It's not that kind of music. It's the kind of music that you close your eyes and you immerse yourself into and listen to from like the start of the album to the finish. It's a journey. It's one of the most musically intoxicating listening experiences you'll ever have. Now, I'm biased because I've been listening to these guys forever, and every once in a while I'll go on a binge. But like, I put this up with the best of Led Zeppelin, and it's different than listening to the Beatles. Like, it's a different taste. This is not something you listen to in a poppy sense. Um, but give it a go. Close your eyes, you know, experience the instrumentation. It's almost like blues, in that there's something about blues where like every note, good blues, is played because it's the note that needs to be played at that time. Like it's the right thing. It has a reason for existing. And this is not blues musically, but it almost has that sort of vibe to it, where like when a note happens, when a key changes, when the chorus comes in, you feel, or at least I do, that like it came in because it had to, and it had to be that way. And a lot of music, like I listen to a lot of music and I can appreciate almost any kind of music. Very little music makes me feel that way. And this particular album from this particular band is one of them. The Edges of Twilight, 1995, The Tea Party.
Well, that's a glowing recommendation.
And if you don't like it, you suck.
Ah, I have
Well,
heard
it
of the
is.
Tea Party, and I'm not sure
Yeah.
that I've ever actually listened to them.
Some of the stuff that got like radio play is like their least good stuff, which is why people that know the Tea Party and hear it, they're like, oh yeah, I kind of remember them. I wasn't into it. You know, it is one of those albums where like what would be the equivalent to B-side material is actually the best stuff. And it's the stuff that like
That's
nobody's heard.
that's often the case, I find, especially with lesser known bands.
Mm. So we are like 17 hours past your bedtime.
Oh, at least. Oh
You've
my God. It's almost time to get
getting
up
a
for
little
work.
bit orange. Do you have
Spreading the
anything
stem.
before we call it a night? Yeah.
I think that's good, man. I am looking forward to playing some D&D again sometime in the future. So if you need a guest star on a Tuesday night, let me know.
Hey, plan a one shot when you get a little
Yeah,
bit of time.
yeah,
I'd
that
be
too.
happy to be a player.
I will get on that.
All right. Well, it's been good talking to you, man. We promise it won't be 2+ weeks before the next episode, hopefully. Knock on wood.
4 days.
Hey, if you want to make any recommendations for the show, submit anything to the Podbag. Send us an email, podbag@nerdingundertheinfluence.com. We'd love to hear you. We're
Send a
everywhere.
complaint.
Yeah, we're everywhere, you know. Like us on YouTube, subscribe. If you listen to us on Apple, you know what? We'd love a 5-star review or a 4-star review.
Or a 1-star review. Those work too.
Yeah, that might be counterproductive, but hey, if you want to leave us a 1-star review, if you've listened, I don't know, what is this going to be, 2.5 hours into the episode to have us
Yeah.
beg you for engagement?
Yeah.
Then you leave whatever review you want to leave.
That's
We'll
right.
appreciate it. We'll like it.
Yeah.